Hi and welcome back to my channel. In this video you have my recent reads vlog, the first of Magical Readathon. However, all of the books that I have either finished or I'm currently reading are not on my actual TBR. So doing great there so far. So first off, we have a book that I started in March. It sort of fit into Realmathon, but I finished it in April, and that is Manslaughter Park. Unknowingly, I started with book 3. But this is sort of like a companion, cozy mystery sort of thing based on Jane Austen's novel. This one being based on Mansfield Park, obviously. Now, I do not know that much about Mansfield Park. I know a lot more about Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility. I don't remember enough about Mansfield Park to really compare them, but I did really enjoy this book. Now, that being said, because this is book 3, Elizabeth Bennet makes a cameo appearance. She's in it fairly significantly. Have I spoiled things for Pride and Premeditation? Maybe. We shall see when I read that one, but I'm definitely going to continue reading this series. So Fanny Price is not the kind of person you would think of as an intrepid investigator. She wasn't in the original novel either, and I think Tears of Price stuck with that. Now, in one of the reviews, or I think in a review, I read something about the plot twist taking someone completely by surprise, as in the whodunit, who was the actual culprit. I, because of that, was like, I think it's probably X person, but it can't possibly be that one because they said it was so surprising. And I kept thinking, who could it possibly... It was who I thought it was. I had to laugh about that one. And it made total sense with the way that at the beginning she talks about, we all think that Fanny could have done better or deserved better. So do with that what you will. I really enjoyed it. I could have done without the romance bits that come in towards the end because Tears of Price does not do it as well as Jane Austen. But the mystery, the cozy aspect of it, I loved. So I am really excited about continuing in this series. The other 2 books that I'm currently reading, I don't know if I'll finish it today, but I'm reading another one of my arcs on ebook, and I picked up the Grace of Kings audiobook. That is on my series to start this year. Is it the series I planned to start this month? No, that is the Robert Jackson Bennett series, Foundry Side. However, Broken Binding is putting out another version of their special editions of the Grace of Kings Quartet, the Dandelion Dynasty series. So I decided to start reading that to see if I'm going to shell out for this special edition. So far, I'm leaning towards yes. I should go get some reading done. Okay, so I'm coming to you a week after I filmed the first clip. The next Monday, I did not intend to make this a 2-week vlog, but I got a lovely cold, which you can probably still hear my congestion. Been coughing a bit towards the middle of last week, and it always starts with a sore throat and talking. No, that's something I don't want to do, so I ended up not being able to update. I would have been updating only about another 1 book because some of the other well, no, 2 books, because the audiobook that I had took me quite a while to read, and then I ended up over the weekend reading 3 more on audiobooks, but I'll get to those in just a minute. The first one that I'm going to talk about is The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu, and I read this one. It's on my series to start list, but not the one that I planned for this month because Broken Binding is re-releasing their special editions of it in a different colorway, and I wanted to see if I wanted to shell out that money. The answer is yes. So this was not quite a 5-star, but I thoroughly loved my time with this book. A lot of people talk about and describe this book as a setup book, as a groundwork history before you get into the actual meat of the macro plot and everything for the Dandelion Dynasty. And I totally see that, and I see why it doesn't work for everyone. It actually has a less than 4-star review overall average on Goodreads, which is frankly ridiculous. So this book spans decades, and there are so many characters in here, and I was listening to it as an audiobook. This, I didn't even realize it when I purchased it, is the British version. I love this cover so much more than the American version, but they are more tightly bound, and so if I had tried to read it, I would have cracked the spine, and I don't want to do that. Read it physically, I mean. But so I was listening to it as audiobook, and there are so many characters talked about in here that I know that a lot of these connections would have made even more sense if I tried to keep track of them throughout. But I also knew that if I tried to keep track of it, especially just seeing that, not even seeing the names, but just hearing them, that I would lower my reading experience of it. And so I decided I'm going to go with the flow. I'm going to try to wrap my head around as much as I possibly can with this. And that was the way to go. This is definitely setting up to be a book that will open up even more on a reread. Maybe I'll get an ebook version from the library or something and read this series again in the future. I don't know if I will or not. I don't reread a lot, but this I can see getting a whole lot out of it. But in this history, there are so many points of view. It shifts seamlessly. It flows from one perspective to another. There are some that you come back to more frequently than others. There's one perspective that persists throughout. He's a very, like, a teenage, like preteen boy early on in the story, and he's a fully grown man at the end. And the character arc that he has throughout this whole book is astounding. The characters in here, even though a lot of them don't have that much page time, they feel like real people. They have real stumbling blocks and things that they learn, and it's reality. It's brutal, but yet like it's realistic and not heartwarming, but it's almost like you feel seen in a fantasy world. Now, it's very light on the fantasy aspects. It's very much historical, and for someone like me, that is right up my alley. And there are so many reviewers that I follow on BookTube who have loved this series, and I'm like, I have better like this series. I really, really like it. So I'm really excited to keep going in this series, and I hope I do it sooner rather than later. Let's get to the books that I read over the weekend. So over the weekend, even though I did have the cold, it sort of let up over like Friday afternoon-ish into Saturday, which is really nice because I was running the Cooper River 10K, and it's one of the largest 10Ks in the country, and I had to drive down to get there. It's in my state. And so obviously I was listening to an audiobook along the way. I didn't end up listening to an audiobook during the race. I wasn't planning on it, and then that was confirmed by the fact that I left my headphones sitting on the bathroom counter here. Good job. But anyway, the first book, the book that I chose to read is actually the first Aurelian book that I finished for this month. I forget, this was the one for the birthstone. Hold on. I realized I had my sheet right up nearby. Okay, so this one fulfills the astronomy prompt, which is a zodiac recommendation. I'd heard a lot of mixed things about this book, but I was willing to give it a chance. And I have this author's first book, The Lost Apothecary, and I've heard that that one is better, so I will still read that one. The writing in this is not terrible, but it's also not a decently told story. At first, I was intrigued. You have this set up here. The main character, Lena, her sister was murdered on 31st October, on Halloween. And her sister was very into seance and spiritism and the whole mystical side of things. And this is a place where like it's considered a real thing. And so she wants to find out what happened to her sister. And she tracks down this woman who was teaching her sister, like her sister was studying under her, and she becomes her pupil. But Lena doesn't necessarily believe in it. She's much more skeptical. But through this, she becomes more of a believer and a practitioner in it. And it's almost set up like a Holmes and Watson dynamic here, similar to the Tainted Cup. Spoiler alert, Tainted Cup did it light years better. At the same time that her sister died on the 31st, there was also a very influential man in the London Seance Society, which is one of these gentlemen clubs in London. He died the same night. Her teacher gets recruited to come back and hold a seance. And one of the things about this teacher is that she always holds it where the person died. And so she had left on very bad terms originally, because basically she believed there was shady stuff going on, like people who didn't actually believe in this and that were just charlatans and preying on vulnerable people. But she gets convinced to come back and do this seance, and things unfold from there. On the surface, this seems like a decent plot, a decent idea. And at first I was really getting into it. But then, and I cannot see any purpose whatsoever to include this scene in here. There is a self-satisfaction scene from Lena very early on in this book, like maybe 15% in. It did nothing except to confirm that she was queer. Why would you put that in there? I don't understand the purpose of this. And immediately, I was listening to it on my run before I headed down, and I'm just like, wait, what's happening here? And it pulled me out of the narrative almost completely. I almost considered DNFing it right then. Now, I still count this book because I finished it. Should I have finished it? Probably not, because I didn't end up liking the book. There are so many times throughout this book, the narrative is humming along, and then there's some sort of scene that gets thrown in there from one of the characters. And I forgot to say it. This is dual POV. The vice president of the London Seance Society, Mr. Morley, is the other POV. And apparently he had a thing with the now dead sister of Lena, the other character. There are just various times where scenes full of innuendo. It never goes anywhere. Nothing is ever said explicitly. But it doesn't have to. It's like you're doing everything but watching it, on the screen or whatever. And every time that would happen, it would pull me out of the narrative. And then the ultimate conclusion. And the way that things were twisted, like the double takes, the twists, and like her doubting and thinking that her mentor was the bad guy. I'm like, I don't believe this. This doesn't make a lot of sense. And then it turned again. And it just was so melodramatic. When I was going through Compile and rating it, part of me, based on just the sheer vibes that I got from it, wanted to give it maybe a 2-star. But when I was going through Compile, enough of the bare bones were there for it to get a bare minimum 3-star. I might go back and adjust that. I think it's going to end up a 3-star because the bare bones of the actual writing are fine. My enjoyment score on Compile was a 4.5. So that's about a 2-star rating. So I don't recommend this book. Thankfully, the next book I picked up is book 4 in the Front Desk series. My favorite yet out of this series. I was listening to this one on the way back, and several times throughout this, I'm so glad I was driving by myself. I'm like, Kellyanne, what have you done to me? What are you doing? Because I was like tearing up at various things that were happening throughout the story. And there was a bit of a lull in the series in the 3rd book because the narrative, the driving plot, the conflicts, there were 2 of them and they're 2 separate. So it felt like she was trying to do too much in the 3rd book. The 4th book, it kind of is, it's more united, and there's not life and death stakes for the hotel here. They're trying to, so Mia and her family, they're trying to purchase a home. Also, it's around the time of the 1996 World Cup where America was playing China. And obviously this is going to mean a lot for her as a citizen of dual identity in the United States. More of the focus was actually on her friend Jason and his father, who used to own the motel and was really mean and nasty to them in the 1st book. He was the antagonist of the 1st book. And he still really doesn't know how to do things right. But there was so much delving into what made him who he is and how he's acting towards his son. It was so heartwarming. I loved every bit of this book. The way that Kellyanne is writing this series is just so well done. I just now have to get my hands on the 5th one. And then the last book that I finished last week is book 6 in the Sisters Grimm series. I read half of this on the way back and then finished it on Sunday. In this one, the driving conflict is the fact that the Red Hand has seemingly taken over Ferryport Landing, this place where all the Ever Afters live, and they've arrested Mr. Canis, who is like the protection for the Grimm family, and they're trying to get him free, and they're bringing up all of these charges from the Big Bad Wolf, and that whole thing gets explained. And there's more delving into the backstory, and more Ever Afters are brought into the story. I will say that some of the continual conflict with Sabrina, it is getting a little bit frustrating and a little bit old. She's learning new things, but they kind of just seem like the same problem with different clothes on. I just am like, how dense is she? how many times does she have to learn this same lesson? There is still some improvement. She's not the same that she was in the first couple books. I've kind of given up hope for remarkable character change and difference in Sabrina, because I don't think that's the point of this book. I think the point of this book is like, you know, tale of the week fairy tale adventures, and that's what I'm reading them for, and I enjoyed them. I think they'll be a fun thing to have on the shelves of my classroom library. So I ended up, oh, I just remembered another book that I read that I don't have physically, and that was another arc. So I am going to talk about that one real quickly, and that is The Probability of Everything. I started off really liking the book and intrigued by it, but also a little bit confused. It is set up as this alternate reality, near dystopian sort of book, because it opens up with the discovery of this asteroid that has been knocked off course by another asteroid or a comet or something and is now headed towards Earth. And there's like an 80-something% chance that it's going to hit Earth and basically destroy life as we know it. And they're predicting it's in like 3 days and X number of hours potential impact. The book is set up like it is the main character, Kemi, dealing with the world has ended or is about to end. Like the world has ended, but it hasn't yet. People are still living their life as if it hasn't ended. And yet some people are going off the deep end because it has ended or is about to end. And she's trying to figure out where does she fall in between that. And she's also trying to create this time capsule so that future Earthlings will remember them. And that was the thing that I could not square away, because she's very math and statistics and probability driven, and she knows what's going to happen. And yet she's creating a time capsule that she's physically going to bury. And yet the world is going to be catastrophically destroyed by an asteroid. Surely she would know that any time capsule she created would also get destroyed. And I couldn't square that away. And there were teeny tiny hints strewn in throughout the book that let you know, that help by the end rectify this disconnect that a lot of readers are going to have in their brain. And I'm trying to be very vague about it, because the reveal that comes, I'd say about 85% of the way through the book, it's going to change your experience if you know going into the book what that reveal is. And so when that reveal happened, I was like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. I still don't understand. I still can't square away some of these things that were happening, some of her actions, some of the people around her, some of their actions. I still don't, I can't make this fit in my mind. And even by the time it ended, I just was left with this unresolved, I don't know what to do with this story kind of feeling about the book. And it had the potential to be so good. I don't like not being able to understand it and understand the narrative. And so it ended up a 3.5 star. For me, I could give more detailed thoughts. I think that the choice that the author made was an interesting one. And I think that the way that she chose to tell this story didn't quite connect with the message that she was trying to tell. And I don't know if that's coming across at all, because I'm trying to be very vague and not give anything away, because I think that would give away the punch, the poignance of the story. So a mixed bag for me. I don't think it's poorly written. I think it is a debut, so I would read from this author again. I just ended up, this one was slightly disappointing for me. So all in all, last week I read 6 total books. I'm trying to do 30 and 30 unofficially, and so just a little bit less than March. Am I crazy? Probably. But I'm about a book behind on that. Soon to be 2. I don't know. We'll see how that goes. And I'm going to make this into a 2-week vlog and just not have a vlog out this week as of when I'm filming it, but last week as of when you're watching this. So I'm going to go. I am currently reading another arc. Oh, I forgot. These 2 also fit prompts for Aurelium. Let me check and see which ones they fit. Okay, so the astronomy was for my career, but key player was for a class that's not for my career, but I have art of illusion, which is shadow play, the word game or play in the title. There was another one. This one was supposed to be the one for the bingo. And I'm trying to see if that's a class that I need. It is not a class that I need, so I'm not going to end up getting that one. You were supposed to make a book bingo before reading the book, but I forgot about that and just started playing it on my ride back when I finished Key Player. Oops. So I have crossed 2 classes off. I will not black out or earn scores in all of my classes this semester, but I'm still on track for my career of alchemy. But anyway, I'm currently reading an arc. It's called Herc. It's a Greek myth retelling. It's really slow going, and I'm contemplating DNFing it, but I really want to bump up my arc percentage, and it's not bad, so I might push through, I might not. I haven't decided. I need to decide. I'm only like 44% through, and it's just a slog. And I've also, on audiobook, started Bonesmith. So this Herc is not for a class, but this one is. It's for a yellow title. I forget which class that is, but I'm intrigued so far. I'm about 30% through this one. I probably will finish that tomorrow. I don't know what I'm going to end up picking next. I'm going to DNF. I'm going to DNF Herc. I just decided it. I'm just not interested in it at all. So because I've just decided to DNF it, I'll talk about it briefly here. This is going to be a longer update than the others. The problem is, so it's told from a variety of different perspectives of all these different people around Hercules. It just keeps drilling in again and again and again that Herc, for lack of better words, not meaning to rhyme, is a jerk, and he's worthless, and he's kind of stupid, and there's basically nothing redeeming about him. It just keeps being shown in different ways from different perspectives, and I just am like, I know Greek mythology. Do I need to keep reading this? So I'm gonna DNF it. I'll have to come up with a rating because I think I've read enough of it that I can write a decent-ish review on NetGalley, so it'll count for my percentage, but DNFing it. I'm going to pick up another arc probably because I want to plow through those because I'm so close to getting my percentage to 80%. I still have a lot of the month left to read this stuff for my classes for Aurelium. Okay, I'm back with another update, a short one this time, fresh after my run, out of the shower. Only one book to talk about because, like I said in the previous update, I DNF'd Herc. I started reading another arc, A Hope in the Valley by Macaulay Perkins. I'm almost done reading that one. I'm on the up and up from my cold, although I probably still sound a little bit congested. So the book that I'm going to talk about is Bonesmith by Nikki Palpretto. I have loved the first 2 books in the Heart of Flames series, at least A Crown of Feathers. I forget what the series is called. Anyway, I've read those 2 by her. This is her first book, not in that series, because that was her debut series. So in this book, you have the main character whose name I forget. Her name is Wren. She is the heir to the Bonesmith house. And in this world, there are a bunch of different smiths. So they're magic users that specialize in certain types of magic. Obviously, a bonesmith is going to specialize in bone magic. There's stone smiths, not very many, different types of smiths. She's the heir to the house, but she's not well liked at all by her grandmother who runs the house because she, basically, her birth completely upended a political marriage alliance that her grandmother was trying to set up between her father, who is the second son, and the heir to the kingdom. So all the smith houses, well, not all of them, but some of them are nobility, and the bone house is part of the nobility. So her grandmother has never liked her. At the beginning of this book, it opens up with a trial where she'll become, I forget what it's called, but it's basically she's joining the service, she's proving her name, etc. She has to go through a trial. She's double-crossed and sent out to this outpost. And when she's there at this outpost, she starts learning a lot of things that have not been told to her. Things that she has always counted as true that weren't actually true. So one of the problems is dealing with the undead. There at the edge, at the border, there's what's called the breach. The magic is untamed. It's unsafe out there. If a soul is not reaped properly, which is what they do as bonesmiths, then they can be misused and harvested, and it can become bad. There was previously another type of smith called ghost smiths, and they actually manipulated the actual ghosts, and that's considered perverse in this world. And so there's also another type of smith, the ironsmiths. Their lands were outside of the breach, and they wanted help in getting back their lands, winning back their lands, but the Bonesmiths sort of betrayed them to curry favor with the Empire. It's really complex. The political machinations in here, stellar. Very difficult to explain. But it turns out, when there's this epic battle, her uncle, her father's brother, is considered this great hero. But he dies out there. Now her father is the heir. That's why her grandmother's so upset. Turns out it wasn't as straightforward as they thought. Are the Ironsmiths actually all dead? Hint, anytime you hear that in a fantasy book, like this group of people was completely wiped out, that's code for, oh no, someone survived. You know what I mean? It's typical of fantasy tropes. Of fantasy books, I should say. This is phenomenal. While she's serving out there, one of the, like the second son, the third son, the Spare's spare, is sent on this basically grand tour and looking at a bunch of different things, and he ends up out there and befriends Ren. He's a cool guy. I really like him. And because goldsmiths have married into the royal house, some of the members of the royal family are also goldsmiths. So he's a goldsmith. And you have Ren, who's a bonesmith. And then you have another character that they meet who's an ironsmith. And then some things are revealed towards the end of this. It is so good. The way that Nikki Palpretto weaves all of this together, I really, really like how she writes, and I cannot wait to read the sequel to this. Currently, I'm reading City of Last Chances by Adrian Tchaikovsky. It is definitely a very different kind of book. So Bonesmith is very centered, very character driven on like mainly one character with the side characters. City of Last Chances is more of a story of the city, and it's building, it's like he's crafting and building out these layers of the city. I'm really frustrated with myself because obviously my body's trying to recover, so I've been a little bit more tired. And so last night when I was reading, when I was cross-stitching and listening to the audiobook, at one point I'm like, I'm tired. I'm just gonna sit in the chair, lean back, and just listen. Next thing I know, it is 12:47 at night. I go to bed at 11, and the audiobook had been playing the whole time, and I listened at 2.5 times speed. So I had to go back and try to figure out where I was on that while being incredibly sleepy and disoriented. That was fun. So I'm going to try to pick back up, and I hope that it's going to be successful because I really want to give this book its best chance. Missing pieces here and there because I'm falling asleep, probably not the best thing to do for that. But anyway, I hope the next time that I come back on to update, I'll be updating about at least 2, Hope in the Valley, the arc that I'm reading, and City of Last Chances. We shall see on that one. Okay, so I love it when my light gives me this weird red lighting, but I don't have fancy lighting, so we're just gonna go with it. I'm here to update the last books that I read in the second half of the week, well, most of the week. I could have probably updated yesterday, but again, I typically don't update on Saturdays. So I have 5 books to talk about. 3 of them I have here in front of me. 2 of them I read as ARCs, as ebooks on my new iPad. I didn't mention that I got that, but I wanted to get the iPad just for reasons. But anyway, let me talk about those 2 first. So the first of those is Hope in the Valley by Mitali Perkins. Hope in the Valley is set in, I believe, the 1980s in what's now known as Silicon Valley. I think it was called that even then. And this takes place before the tech boom, but right as it's starting to get going, as more people are moving in. The main character, Pandita, she is first generation Indian American. Her parents were both born in India. She has older twin sisters, and I think it's 3 years ago, her mom died unexpectedly. There was a pregnancy complication, and it's been really hard for them to move on, to grieve. And across the street, there's this old orchard. No one lives there now, and they haven't for years and years. But something special that Pandita had with her mom is they would go over, they'd sneak through. They technically weren't supposed to go in there, but they did, and they had this special place together. But then at the start of this story, the property is sold, and there is strife and debate on what to do with it. There's a side that wants to preserve it. There's a side that wants it to be demolished and turned into affordable housing, and there's a side that just wants it to be developed. So the idea of gentrification. And because Pandita has this connection with the place, she wants it preserved. And she doesn't find out in time, and some letters that she had from her mom, she stored over on the porch swing at the house, but it was gone. And she's devastated by this. And so throughout the book, she's working through this coming of age, dealing with the grief, dealing with the fact that her dad has now met someone and there might be a new person in their life. She's an interesting character, the new woman, basically. And she's also dealing with the fact that she's a different person than both of her older sisters and her dad seem to want her to be. And she has to go to this drama camp, which does end up becoming influential in the story. But it was fascinating to see Pandita work through this coming of age novel and dealing with the idea of wanting to hold on, but when you can't hold on, what do you need to do to move on? And overall, this is just a very heartwarming story. The second book that I read as an arc is I Am Kavi. I do not remember, or I do not know actually how to pronounce this author's name, but this book is set in an area of the world that I haven't read much from. It is set in Sri Lanka. And I knew vaguely that Sri Lanka had dealt with a civil war for decades, and I didn't know much about it though. This book is set during the time of that civil war at some point in it, not quite present day, but also not quite historical fiction. And the main character, Kavi, she is having to deal with the fact that her father was basically a victim of the war. He fought, he lost his leg, and then died from a heart attack. And her mom remarried, and Kavi does not like this new guy. She thinks basically he's worthless, but she's just having a hard time moving on. But one thing that she does do well is school, and she's able to take these exams and go on and get free schooling at this in a bigger city. And she ends up living with a relative who works as a maid. And so now she's having to deal with the fact that not only has her mom remarried, but she's also pregnant, and Kavi feels like she's losing her place there. She has to deal with these new relationships and how the family in the house that she lives in, the family that her aunt works for, how they treat her and how her new friends, and she's trying to hide stuff like the fact that she's poor. And it's a really fascinating look at this aspect, because you've got the aspect also of the two different sides in the Sri Lankan war. This book does something that I love in historical fiction, and it tells me more about history, but it also creates a desire to learn more about a particular aspect of history. So I really enjoyed this book. So those are both successes and fairly quick reads. In between those, what I'll call physical reads, not audiobook reads, I read Spy Family Volume 2. I wanted to get some pages up, and I just felt like reading this. Also, I'm thinking about doing our fantasy bingo. I may or may not create a separate video for that, but this counts for one of them. And no, it's not fantasy, but our fantasy or Reddit, that bingo every year, it's speculative works. This one did not quite live up to the soaring heights of Volume 1. That one just hooked me in. I loved every bit of it. This one, I still enjoyed all of it. It just didn't quite match up to those levels. I still really loved this. And in this, you have Lloyd and Yor, who are the parents. So the setup is you have Lloyd, who's codenamed Twilight, who is a spy, and he has this mission, and he has to infiltrate the school, so he has to get a daughter, who is Anya, this character here. Little does he know that Anya's actually a telepath. He doesn't know that, but she knows that. And then to get into the school's very old-fashioned, you could say. It has to be a two-parent family, and so he recruits another woman, Yor, to be his wife. I think he actually marries her, but he does not know that Yor is actually an assassin. But of course, Anya, who's a telepath, she knows both of these, and she wants to please both of them. She loves both of them so much. And that's the setup for this, getting into this school. In this book, you see the introduction of a few new characters at the school, like the target's son, and then you also see Lloyd and Yor trying to figure out how do they act as parents, because they both, even though they don't realize it, Yor more than Lloyd, they both actually want to be a good parent to Anya. And so they're dealing with the two sides of their lives. Like, the unconventional nature of their jobs, the unconventional nature of their parenthood for Anya. And you also see the introduction of another character in the form of Yor's brother, who has his own secret side. And I think this is going to be a theme for this book. For this series, I should say. So I am really excited, and I enjoyed my time reading this book. Next, we have one that I'm conflicted about, and it took me a long time to read. I can't remember if I mentioned or not the fact that I was listening to it on audiobook and I completely fell asleep and woke up an hour and a half after my normal time when I went to bed and had to try to find where I started, and that is City of Lost Chances by Adrian Tchaikovsky. That was a little off-putting at first. I was so annoyed because this book is so detailed and so intricate with the web of political intrigue and everything that's built around this city that you really have to pay attention to pretty much everything. It ended up not being all that detrimental in the long term. I was kind of frustrated a little bit with my experience with this book because I wanted so much to really, really love this book. As I read, there was so much that it was intriguing and that I wanted to learn more, and as all of these layers keep getting built and the city keeps expanding, I wanted to really enjoy it. But there was just something that I can't really put into words that kept me from connecting really with this story. And I thought about Grace of Kings, which I read recently this month, which is another one of those stories where you have a huge swath of character and it's a history and it's more than just an individual character story. And I was trying to figure out, why did I love that one so much and connect with it? And I didn't with this one. And I think it really helps that I read both of those books in fairly short succession. There's just something that Ken Liu in Grace of Kings does with those characters, that they feel fully fleshed out and there is depth and there is development. Adrian Tchaikovsky does not really do much with the characters themselves. Like, they're full of characters. Like, he doesn't paint flat characters in his narrative, but that character spark is what was missing in this one. So this book is very well written. It's got a crazy complex magic system and political intrigue, and all of those I really love and enjoy. I just didn't connect with it on a level that's going to make me continue with the series. I'm definitely going to keep this book. I'm very glad about that because this sprayed edges are gorgeous. I'm just not going to continue with the series. And the last book that I read was also kind of a disappointment. Not really, but kind of. And that is book 2 in the Witchlings series. I read book 1, not last year, but the year before for the Goodreads Choice Awards when they had a middle grades version, and I absolutely adored the first book in there. And so the setup of that book is you have this whole magical world, and at a certain birthday or a certain year, I forget which, every single witch has to be chosen for a coven. But there are some, because of numbers and the way that the magic works, that are designated as spares, so that the magic is still balanced. And being designated as a spare is seen as like the worst thing ever. They're seen as, I mean, if you think of Indian culture, Hindu culture, like, they're seen as untouchables almost. They're the worst. There's so much prejudice against them. Seven, the main character, she doesn't think she's going to be a spare, but she ends up as a spare, along with 2 other characters. To avoid being banished and to avoid completely losing out on her dream, there's something else going on, and I can't remember from the first book, but they do the impossible task, and that is supposed to be able to grant them some sort of measure of place in this society. You know, a little bit of a spoiler alert for the first book, they complete it. So they're still considered spares, but the world opens up and there's so much more available to each of these characters, including what Seven's magic actually is. There's a position called an uncle, and it involves speaking with animals. That's the kind of magic that Seven has. The thing that the first book had was that the stakes were of the impossible task, of the main driving conflict in the narrative, were very essential to Seven's career, to her life, to everything going on for her. In this book, however, it felt too split, because you have the Golden Frog Games, which is like this competition between all of these towns that have magic. And Thorn, her friend, is competing in this, and so she's involved in it, and there's other stuff involved in it and other things happening And there's also the stuff happening with her magic, and is it wrong? Because she can talk to monstros and not just animals. And it was split too much. And it felt like the overarching conflict with the Golden Frog games was not as essential to Seven's life as it was in the first one. And because it felt too split, I think that lowered the narrative a bit. I still really enjoyed it. There were still some really good scenes in here. I just hope that this is just second book syndrome out of this trilogy. I think it's a trilogy, and that Ortega is able to bring it home for the third book in the series. So there you go. There are all the books that I read for the past 2 weeks. I have read a lot of books this week because the stack that I have here does not even include, I think, the 4 or 5 arcs that I read. So I have still been reading a lot. Not quite as much as I've read in March, but that's totally okay. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.